Hello everyone and welcome to Traffic Corner Tuesday. My name is Nancy Crow and I'm the Vice President of Marketing for SPAC Consulting and your host for today's session. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone of a couple housekeeping rules today. Please mute your mics to minimize the background noise during the presentation, which will allow everyone to hear our presenters clearly. And secondly, please join the conversation. Today's presentation is intended to be an interactive dialogue. I would encourage all attendees to feel free to ask questions or to share your experience throughout the presentation. Just type your questions into the chat area and we'll address your questions throughout the presentation. Finally, I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. Mike SPAC is the president of SPAC Consulting and is our recognized industry leader of traffic studies. He is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, past president of the North Central section of the ITE, and a fellow of the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Since 1996, Mike has led over 1,000 traffic engineering projects, and during the past 2 decades, Mike has founded 4 companies, including SPAC Consulting. He is also the creative force and principal writer of the industry-leading blog Mike on Traffic. He's an accomplished author with articles published in industry publications and has written several industry manuals that are used by engineers throughout the world. Also joining us today is Bryant Fiesick. He is the Vice President of SPAC Consulting and is also widely known in the transportation industry, having managed over 700 traffic engineering projects. He is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, and Bryant is an expert in Synchro, Sims Traffic, Vistro, and vSim traffic modeling software packages. He thrives on developing creative solutions to traffic and transportation issues, so please don't hesitate to type in your question and give him an opportunity to show off his talents. Bryant is a regular contributor on Mike on Traffic blog and is a published author of industry publications, as well as a co-author of several industry manuals. Please join me in welcoming Mike and Bryant.
Thanks, Nancy. Mike here.
And Bryant. Hello, everyone.
It's good to be back. Bryant and Jonah in our office handled the last one while I was on vacation. Thank you. And,
no problem.
And as Nancy mentioned, we got a few things going on over here at SPAC Enterprise. Most of you have hopefully heard of Mike on Traffic. We do training materials at SPAC Academy, engineering through SPAC Consulting, and the list goes on. Today, we're going to be talking about parking and going through a big example of an infill project and how we right-sized the amount of parking for a large development. One thing we want to do, if you're interested, at the end we're going to give you details, but we have a case study sample report that we'll be happy to share with you. So just some housekeeping in addition to what Nancy mentioned. Today we're going to be going over large development and kind of mixed-use parking requirements. In a couple weeks, mid-March, we're going to go over traffic signal warrants and how we approach those. And then March 28th, we are going to go over an acceleration lane case study that we did for MnDOT. And these are acceleration lanes on the inside of 4-lane divided roads that are put in primarily to help left-turning heavy vehicles get up to speed in that acceleration lane. And MnDOT was wondering, are they utilized? Do they work? Those kinds of things. And we did a large study, a lot of data collection for them, and we're going to be going over that. And we're excited about that research project.
All right, so let's get into our topic for today. This is the Southdale Office Center. So we're down in Edina in this area, if you're familiar with the area. We have, is that the first mall over?
Yeah, Southdale was the first
door.
mall built in 1956, the first indoor mall. And there we go. So there's a large mall here with Macy's and all the normal stores you'd expect. And then over west of it, across France Avenue, a six-lane divided county road. So large road. We have this office center complex that was built in the mid-60s.
So this is a very typical suburban setting. Mike mentioned the 6-lane road right out in front there, turn lanes, very wide. You can see all the surface parking in the area, lots of places for people to park. And again, just a very typical suburban setting developed in the 60s.
Yep, so it has about 400,000 square feet spread out across several office buildings here and a little restaurant in the corner. 6-lane divided road here, 4-lane divided wrapping around the backside, 4-lane divided over here. So definitely a lot of capacity out there. And so our study began in 2008. The property owners came to us and asked, down in the southeast portion of the parking lot, can we add a 60,000 square foot medical office building?
So one of the first things we did was just your typical traffic impact study. So this, I don't think these components are going to surprise anybody. Take the traffic counts, look at the existing capacity, forecast, rerun with the new traffic in. So again, we're focused more on the traffic, but we did do that, or I'm sorry, we're focused more on the parking for this webinar, but we did the traffic impact study as part of that first run of what does this mean for the surrounding roadways and area.
Yep, and we honed in on the public street intersections on the southern portion of the site, the access intersections, with the building being discussed down here on the southern portion of the site. So pretty rough feasibility study.
Yep, and with all the capacity in there, 6 and 4 lanes, there was obviously no big deal there. So the first run with the traffic impact study revealed no issues.
Yep. So then, more interesting, I think us traffic professionals are going to be dealing with this more and more of, we have big parking lots that were built in 60s, 70s, 80s, and as we shift away, who knows what autonomous vehicles are going to do, but there is a good chance the site parking requirements are going to go down. And we've worked on several of these projects where it's an infill on us. There's a sea of parking for an office building or commercial retail, and kind of can we drop in an outlot building? And I actually think there's some potential here for all the people in the industry to nudge property owners to think about repurposing some of that infill space.
Yeah, we've seen that with big box places as well, big box retail, where they, by codes, they were required to put in all this parking, and now they're realizing, hey, we can put in another little store out here, be it a fast food or something else. So again, making better use of our land.
Yeah, in our market, Chick-fil-A, that's a big strategy for Chick-fil-A's to be shoehorned into existing developments. So the parking study, which was more interesting, that we did back in 2008, we broke this almost 1,500 stall parking lot into 11 zones, and had a couple people driving around counting how many cars are parked in each zone. We did this on a Tuesday one week, the Wednesday the following week. We were out there from about 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. To make sure, we wanted to make sure we got the parking trend lines of how this was being used.
After we captured all that data, we then went back and talked to the owners, and we figured out the occupancy of all the uses there, and they were about 95% occupied, so mostly full, but we still took our data and we factored it up and said, okay, if they went to 100%, what do we think that would mean for the parking? So just making sure, kind of this second step here of making sure that you're accounting for all that could be there. Just take your trend line, divide it by the percentage occupied, and you get your new numbers.
So then lastly, the fun part of the analysis was working with the architects, and okay, we drop in a multi-story 60,000 square foot building here. How many stalls do we lose with that building footprint? And then layer on, what's the peak forecasted demand for that medical office building? But to take half a step back to what Bryant was talking about, the existing parking occupancy then factored up to represent 100% occupancy of the building. The trend line slowly at 7 a.m. Builds as would be expected. Peak parking demand 10:30ish in the morning, dips down as people go out to lunch, some people come back, and then empties out pretty much 6, 7 p.m. Very consistent trend lines between the 2 different days, 2 different weeks. So we're pretty comfortable. We got good data out there.
And then just also thinking about it from your own personal point of view, thinking about how office works. I mean, this matches up with our expectations. You have that rise in the morning. Your busiest time is that mid-morning period. Even people who arrive late are there. No one's left for lunch left. So intuitively, the lines made sense to us and just kind of, again, gave us that satisfaction of we recorded correctly, matching what we thought it should be.
So with the trend line, there are about 1,475 stalls on site. The very peak parking demand here at 10:30 was just over 1,100 stalls. When we did the calculations, so we have a gap of about a capacity of 375 unused stalls at the peak was what we found, and the peak parking for the medical office building was about 200 stalls, and so based on those calculations, we said your footprint could remove up to 156 parking stalls on site, and the site would still work. That was the punchline back in 2008.
So pretty simple way to go through it and just look at that, getting out there, counting the demand, saying what's actually there, and then looking at what you want to add. How much capacity do you have? So pretty straightforward process, but a lot of data collection going into it.
So between 2008 2015, the property developer, the owner, actually came back to us several times. That initial run in 2008, if you're working back then, you remember 2008, 2009 was not the greatest time period for developments happening. We're kind of in a big recession there. But over the years, over the next 7 years, they came back to us 3 different times with kind of different proposed plans. They were working with different possible tenants. And each time they'd come back to us and we'd update our analysis. We knew that all the intersections worked at level of service D or better. Actually, almost all of them were at C. So we weren't concerned about level of service. And we had done a couple of days of data collection. So we felt that kind of mid-morning on a typical weekday would be representative. But we got out there each time and did a run-through a couple of times from 10 o'clock to 11 a.m. to get that what's the occupancy rate for the parking lot, just in case some kind of parking patterns changed. But we found things pretty consistent over the last 7 years.
Yeah, good spot check on our earlier data and basically confirmed that everything was staying consistent with the parking use.
So then, as Brian talked about, just looking at the gap on the trend line, we would just figure out, okay, you have a new proposed building, here's what its peak hour, its peak period parking demand would be, and if it was 300 stalls, well, that meant you had 80 stalls you could take up with building footprint, and we just did those iterations back and forth for the architects as they were kind of doing their feasibility studies.
So last year, this is when, for the nerdy traffic engineers, this is when it got really interesting. They came back and wanted, as you see on the screen, they wanted to add 400,000 square feet of mixed uses. So pretty much we'd been dealing with just small little outlots in the parking lot, trying to figure out what might work there. This comes in and blows that all up, basically. They're looking at a complete revision, new uses, lots of different moving parts through the whole project.
So one of the things that triggered this, obviously, is a rebound in the economy. But the city went through a big visioning process of that France Avenue corridor between the Southdale Mall and the Southdale Office Center, and looked at about a mile of that corridor, and ended up deciding that they really want this to be a big infill corridor, move the buildings close to the road, try to really enhance the pedestrian nature, and try to reduce the auto dependency out there. So this developer ran with that concept and was happy with it. So in addition to leaving the 400,000 square feet of office buildings out there and making some minor tweaks, they're adding in retail right adjacent to the France Avenue, that busy street. They're putting in a big apartment building, a medical office building, a hotel. So really trying to capitalize on the revitalization of this area.
So with that change, you saw all the surface lots we had before in our little map earlier. We're down to about 500. That's how they would change that. But in addition to the surface, they would now have about 1340 stalls in underground ramps. So again, trying to take off the sea of pavement up above, move it underground where you can, but keep some convenient ones next to the different front doors and in various places.
And an important part of those underground ramps is they are large, single level, and connect with stairwells into many of the buildings that are proposed. So they're much more common spaces. They're not underground ramps for just a specific building. So now we had a pretty big challenge. We went through the normal traffic impact study. We looked at about 15 intersections around the area. As we talked about, they're bounded by really big roads with traffic. The site has 2 traffic signals at their access points into it, into them and the adjacent regional mall, bounded by 4 or 6 lane divided roads. So not a huge, well, it was a little surprising to us, but it shouldn't have been. In hindsight, everything will work fine. Was the punchline, and we actually reduced a couple of driveways on the site to clean up access management, which should enhance the pedestrian feasibility and walkability around the area. But when we ran through starting point working with the city planners, well, they're proposing the site, after all this done, have about 800,000 square feet of buildings, and they'll have just under 1,900 parking stalls. Well, for those specific uses on site, city codes require just under 2,700 parking stalls. So that 800 stall difference, that's a huge gap. And this was part of us working with city staff. Well, do they really need the 2,700 stalls? Will 1,887 be enough? So this was really the hinge point, the big thing that our study hung on.
Well, and it's important to keep in mind with city codes, most of them, at least in our experience, were developed in the 60s. They may have been adjusted in the 80s, but they pretty much assume that everybody is going to drive, everybody is going to be a single driver, and they all need a parking spot at the same time. So generally the parking codes are pretty conservative, and that's where you get a big disconnect here between what the code may require and what a developer may want as you start looking at plans.
So the next step in the process was actually forecasting the peak parking demand of what this site and all these uses would be. And we just went to the ITE parking generation book for all these land uses and calculated, okay, according to ITE, we would need about 2,300 parking stalls if all of these uses peaked at the same time. And that'll be an important point later. We collect a lot of data here in Minnesota, trip generation and parking generation data, and we share that all at tripgen.org. But based on our calculations of adding all those peaks together for all those usages, we come up with needing a little more than 2,000 stalls. So if everything peaked together, we would have a demand of about 150 stalls more than what the developer was proposing.
So you can see already how the numbers are starting to come together to closer to what the developer is providing. Just looking at book data basically, or what we had, and saying this is what we think the demand is for those uses.
And I should note that with that parking demand of coming up with 2030, that we started with, we had 48-hour turning movement counts done with our video camera systems at all the access points into the site. So for the existing 400,000 square feet of office, we basically had the trend line of the vehicles coming in and out. We went out there once to count the vehicles in the parking lot to basically adjust that trend line to match existing, because there could have been vehicles that were parked there overnight.
Yep.
If you assume 0 cars parked overnight, this is a very valid way to get parking occupancy at any time. It's just you count the ins and outs for the whole site, and you'll see a trend line over time of the accumulation and then the letting go of all those parked vehicles.
So incidentally, that's a much better way to do it today. When we talked about it, what we did in 2008, we had people going out there and counting every half hour. This was, we counted once and we recorded the intersections and then counted them after the fact. So easier than having somebody out there, and it allowed us to gather basically the parking over 2 days without a ton of effort.
So the punchline is all of our peaks added up to needing about 2,000 stalls. They're proposing about 1,900, so there is a disconnect there. But we worked with the city and came up with an actual estimate of what we think the peak parking will be in a range of 1,600 to 1,800 vehicles if everything's occupied. And we made some adjustments and discussed these, and we gave a range because they are based on big assumptions. But one of the big ones being it's a mixed-use site. So you have the office building, but you're going to have restaurants, fast food, phone stores, all of that retail. So people are going to go out on their lunch hour to use those places, so you can reduce some of the peak demand off of those retail uses. You're going to have an apartment building on site, and that apartment peak is overnight, where all those people are off to work mid-morning while the office component is parking. So we went through an exercise and talked through the kind of compatibility of all the different uses. But we did not do to the vehicle calculations based on those, because they are logical engineering assumptions, but we would just be guessing at what the reductions would be.
Educated guesses. Right along with that, and Mike mentioned it to a degree, the multi-purpose internal trips with lots of stores, and this is the plan, this was the vision for the area. You would have people going between the office and the retail, the apartment and the retail, moving back and forth, not having to get in their car and go to those places. So that's where, again, with a big site like this, you have multiple individual uses, but they all work together, they're all compatible with each other, and assuming people would go back and forth, and that's been our experience. I'm assuming that's pretty consistent around the country, that if people can go to 2 spots at once, they will.
And then lastly, France Avenue is a transit route with bus service going into downtown Minneapolis for workers. They are looking to make it a lot of pedestrian enhancements in the area. This development is very progressive. They're putting in a Wohnhof internal to the site. So no curbs, no signs, just let people, bikes, vehicles mix in the center of the site to kind of get through to the different parking ramp access points. We don't think a lot of vehicles will be going through there, but it is possible. So with these 3 combined, we worked through with city staff that we were comfortable that the 1,900 stalls, just under 1,900, would be realistic, and we may fill it up on 1 or 2 days a year, but kind of normal week-to-week peak parking, we see the site being 80 to 95% full, and the property owner is very comfortable with that, and the city of Edina is progressively moving in that they want their infrastructure to be utilized, so they're comfortable that at being close to that capacity level.
Mm-hmm. And then a couple other notes that we talked with the city about was the weekend versus weekday. So we did all our calculations on the weekday, but it was very easy to, I'll say, dismiss the weekend because the office use drops significantly at that time. So standard office building. They're busy during the week. There's nothing on the weekend or very little. So that parking demand virtually goes away. Therefore, we were able to just state that rather than having to do any calculations for the weekend. We also talked with the city about TDMP strategy, travel demand management, and that's a component that can be added in to help you get those reductions in parking needs, whether it's telecommuting, flex hours, stuff that you can apply to an office or other thing to try to reduce the parking needs.
And they will be having lots of bike racks around, and I believe they're building some locker rooms, shower rooms for bicycle commuters and those kinds of things to enhance the sites to try to get those single occupant vehicles to knock those down.
So all things that help justify a reduction based on increased transit, bike, and ped use.
So I mentioned I think we're going to see a lot more of this, and I hope we see a lot more of these types of developments to kind of infill those seas of parking we have in many of the suburbs, and I think this will come up much more. Did anyone have any questions related to this? I don't see any in the chat, but we have a few minutes here to cover some questions if anyone had anything. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Oh, there's one. How have you addressed the issue when land uses change over time from office to retail or restaurants? I don't recall us doing one of those. Do you recall us doing any of that, Bryant?
Well, this would probably be the closest one where we went from all office to a mixed use. So I think the procedure remains about the same. You can, although you can probably ignore what's happening today, it'd probably be looking at that future use, trying to get to the actual demand, and then looking, is it one use to one use? Is it one office building to a combined retail residential? That's where you can start looking at those other components and how they mix together.
Yeah, but I would think you would want to run through the parking calculation analysis each time.
Yeah.
And maybe as part of the, I would like to see a significant redo of most city ordinances that the parking requirements don't match up with any of our personal data or ITE's data. We'd like to see those be more right-sized. Does the reduction take into consideration the influx during Christmas season, etc.? No, it does not. The retail was about 40,000 square feet of this, so pretty small in comparison to the overall site, so we did not account for that. At a larger shopping center, Walmart, I would want to account for that, but we didn't do that here. And also the city's philosophy basically was, for a few days during Christmas, the site can be full.
Another part that's interesting around the Christmas season is as stores are staying open later, as they're opening on Thanksgiving Day, not just waiting till 6 a.m. on the Friday after, we're starting to see some of those peaks stretch themselves out. So it is busier, but it's not quite the peak that it used to be because everybody seems to be open all the time now.
Over at Mike on Traffic, we've done some data collection at Walmarts and Targets and shopping areas over the Black Friday period, and we're finding that that's the case, that they're still busy, but they are smoothing out. They're not having the giant peak in a couple of hours. They're just busy over Thanksgiving through the weekend.
We do have a couple more questions, but I just want to mention that we are at the end of our scheduled time here, so if people need to leave, feel free. We are recording this. We will be sending out the recording. People can tune in later if they want to hear the answers to all the questions. Yep. But for those who do want to hang on and stay with us, we'll continue going through the questions here. Yeah. And just briefly on the screen, you do see for this study that we've been talking about, you can text us or email Nancy, and you can get the original parking study and the variance that we talked about, so you can see what we exactly wrote up.
And then also just coming up in a couple weeks, we'll be talking traffic signal warrants. So thanks everyone for attending. Now to get back to the last couple of questions. Okay. Was there any ITS used to help guide vehicles to vacant spaces? No, the owner, we brought that up, but the owner did not want to commit to that, but they talked about it.
And that's a good strategy that could be used as well. We've seen that in other areas where there's information about how many spots are left in a parking lot if you have several parking lots, and that can help direct people to the lots rather than having them circle endlessly through them. So those are good strategies to keep in mind.
Okay, and Nick at Hastings asks about just rebutting developers who do want to build a sea of parking. We're starting to see the big box developers, the Walmarts and the Targets, they're actually inching their requirements down on their own. Basically, it's an education process of it's okay to be once or twice a year. It's our opinion that you could have people driving around for a few minutes in your site looking for parking. Some operators won't like that answer, but it really comes down to an economic decision. And Minneapolis here in Minnesota is really pushing hard against parking, especially in the downtown area, in the uptown area, that they want all parking to be paid for internal to really reduce the amount of parking that's being built out there.
And I think it can, some of what we've done can be used in reverse too. You can use ITE data, you can use local data to show the demand for these and basically back up your argument that you're putting too much pavement out there. And then as Nick noted in the comment, if you're building this sea of pavement, it is going to have impacts in terms of stormwater, your green space requirements. So there are a lot of negative impacts from overbuilding, and that's what you're trying to avoid. You want to hit that sweet spot where you've got enough to manage most of the time, 95 to 98% of the time, and not go overboard or underboard.
Okay, and we've also seen a lot of larger developments, if things are in question, will have an area that they own but set aside as just a field or park, kind of a proof of parking concept that there is a space that they can expand the parking lot if they need it, but they're building their best estimate right now, and we really like that approach. Of course, there's a little bit more incremental cost to come back and add parking, but we would rather see them, that strategy. You're not going to do that kind of strategy for a Chick-fil-A or a McDonald's or a Starbucks. But if you're talking about a Walmart without lots, of having them set aside green space that could be expanded for parking, I think that's a very valid strategy.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike.
Okay, and then probably next one, bike stalls recommended. We did not get into that in the study. Edina has as part of their ordinance just requirements for bike stalls, so there will be some put in there. We do get into a lot of that in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but the city didn't really want that as part of this study.
We did mention that it should be provided per code, but did not get into the number.
You eventually use local parking rates. Do these reflect observed max conditions or Minnesota averages, non-auto trips and auto trips? It's just a lot of data we're collecting at different times of the year, so I'm not saying it's... I have questions with the statistical things we do in our industry across the board. I believe our data is more robust than ITE's 30 years worth of data, but it's hard to say if we have the peak of the peak, but we're just out there collecting as much data as we can and keep adding to it. Yeah.
So, yeah, they can get it though, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so our stuff is available. Parking, our parking generation, go to tripgen.org, tripgeneration.org.
Yep.
You can get our trip generation, you can get our parking generation. So you can look at all that data yourself if you want. We provide that for no charge.
Okay, and then Nick has the follow-up question just about the operators who want to show empty parking stalls adjacent to the street just to make as the visual cue that it's easy to get in and out of the site. I don't have a good answer for you on that one, Nick. That some operators like CVS and Walgreens are getting away from that when you push them. They will even put their buildings on the hard corner so people can't even see the parking lots. There are examples of that, even if they tell you there aren't. But it is a shift in business, and it comes down to dollars and cents. I don't know that if there's a specific developer who has that in their head. I think you just need to more right-size your ordinance codes with mins and maxes that are closer to reality, and then that's where you stand on and you just say, no, we're not giving a variance for you to add more parking. That's just part of our policy. Of course, you need to have, this should be a large discussion with your planning commission and city council and part of your comprehensive plan exercises. So this is not a quick and easy just change some numbers in your code, but that's, I would encourage everyone in your position to start having these discussions. Okay, I think that's it for the comments. Thank you, everyone. We ran over about 5 minutes, but really appreciate the interaction here, and hope to see you all back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.